The sterling silver fork trembled in my hand as I stared at the perfectly arranged Christmas table. Red velvet runner, crystal glasses catching the chandelier light, and my daughter-in-law Stella Bono's smug smile radiating from across the mahogany surface like poison ivy creeping up a garden wall. "Addison, you're not eating," my son Liam Brooks said, his voice carrying that patronizing tone he'd perfected since marrying her 3 years ago. At 62, I'd raised him better than this, or so I thought. I forced myself to take another bite of the dry turkey, tasting nothing but the metallic tang of humiliation that had been building in my throat for months. This house, which had once been filled with Liam's laughter and my late husband's terrible jokes, now felt like a courthouse where I was perpetually on trial. "Mom's probably saving room for dessert," Liam continued, cutting his meat with surgical precision. "You know how she gets around the holidays?" "How I get?" I wanted to ask what that meant, but I'd learned to swallow my words the same way I swallowed everything else these days, with difficulty and in silence. Stella's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Oh, Addison always has such an appetite." She reached for her wine glass, the massive diamond ring on her finger catching the light like a searchlight. That ring, 3 carats of princess-cut arrogance that she'd insisted Liam buy her for their 2nd anniversary. The same ring that had somehow become the center of every conversation, every family gathering, every moment she wanted to remind us all of her position in this family hierarchy. "Liam, tell your mother about the cruise," Stella said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "The one we're taking for our anniversary." My son's face brightened in a way it hadn't when he'd looked at me all evening. "We're doing a Mediterranean cruise, Mom. 2 weeks. Stella's been researching all the best excursions." "Sounds lovely," I managed, though the words felt like sawdust in my mouth. 2 weeks in the Mediterranean while I sat in my cramped studio apartment, watching game shows and counting the days until someone might call. "We considered inviting you," Stella continued, dabbing at her lips with the linen napkin I'd bought them as a housewarming gift. "But we thought you might find it too overwhelming. You know, with your arthritis and all." "My arthritis." The same arthritis that didn't stop me from working 40 hours a week at the insurance office, or from walking 3 miles every morning, or from maintaining my own household without anyone's help. But somehow, in Stella's narrative, it made me an invalid who couldn't be trusted with international travel. "I'm sure you'll have a wonderful time," I said, setting down my fork. The clink against the china seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Stella's eyes narrowed slightly. She was always watching, always cataloging my reactions like a scientist studying a particularly unpleasant specimen. "Oh, we will. Liam's been working so hard. He deserves to be pampered." Liam. My Liam, who I'd raised alone after his father died when he was 12, who I'd worked double shifts to put through college, who I'd supported through his first marriage, his divorce, his period of unemployment when he'd lived in my basement for 8 months. That Liam, who now couldn't meet my eyes when his wife spoke about him as if he were a prize she'd won at a carnival. "More wine, Addison?" Stella asked, already reaching for the bottle. "You seem tense." "I'm fine, thank you." "Are you sure? You've been awfully quiet tonight. Not like you at all." Stella's tone was light, conversational, but I caught the edge underneath. Everything was calculated with her, every comment designed to chip away at something. I looked around the dining room that had once been mine, the same wallpaper I'd hung 20 years ago, the same built-in china cabinet where I'd displayed my grandmother's dishes. Now it showcased Stella's modern white ceramics, stark and cold as her personality. "I was just thinking about Christmas mornings when Liam was little," I said, surprising myself with the admission. "How he used to wake up at 5 in the morning, so excited he could barely contain himself." Liam's face softened for just a moment. "I remember that. You'd make those cinnamon rolls from scratch. Your father always said they were better than bakery ones." I smiled at the memory, feeling something warm flicker in my chest for the first time all evening. "How sweet," Stella interjected, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Liam, didn't you tell me your mother once tried to make those rolls for our first Christmas together? What happened to that batch?" Liam's face flushed red. "Stella, that's not—" "Oh, it's fine," she continued, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm sure it was just an off day. Though I have to say, the store-bought ones we had instead were absolutely delicious. The memory hit me like a physical blow. That first Christmas after their marriage, when I'd spent 2 days preparing Liam's favorite recipes, only to have Stella announce that she'd already ordered dessert from a French bakery. For presentation, she'd said, sliding my homemade rolls into the refrigerator where they'd stayed, untouched, until I'd quietly taken them home the next day. I should probably get going, I said, reaching for my purse. It's getting late. But we haven't had dessert yet, Liam protested, though his voice lacked conviction. I'm sure Stella's selection will be perfect without me. Stella's smile was sharp as a blade. Oh, but Addison, you simply must see what I chose. It's from that new boutique bakery downtown, the one with the Michelin-starred pastry chef. Of course it was. Everything in Stella's world had to have a pedigree, a price tag, a story that proved her superiority. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I really should go. Thank you for dinner. But Mom? Liam started, then stopped as Stella placed her hand on his arm. Let her go if she wants to, Stella said softly. She's been acting strange all evening anyway. Strange. The word hung in the air like smoke. Strange because I didn't gush over Stella's new kitchen renovation. Strange because I didn't ask for the 1,000th time to hear about her yoga instructor's spiritual journey to India. Strange because I had the audacity to exist in a space that Stella had clearly marked as her own. I gathered my coat from the hall closet, my hands shaking slightly as I buttoned it. The house felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in on me like a trap. Through the dining room doorway, I could see Liam and Stella in heated whispered conversation, her hand still possessive on his arm. Drive safely, Liam called out as I reached the front door. No offer to walk me to my car. No suggestion that I should stay longer. Just a perfunctory goodbye that felt like a dismissal. I sat in my car for a long moment before starting the engine, looking back at the house where I'd raised my son, where I'd thought I'd always be welcome. The windows glowed warm and golden, but inside, I knew Stella was already orchestrating the post-Addison conversation, cataloging my failures and reinforcing her position as the woman who'd saved Liam from his overbearing mother. The drive home to my apartment took 12 minutes, but it felt like crossing a continent. When I finally closed my own door behind me, the silence was deafening. No husband to ask about my day, no son to call with random questions. Just me, my thoughts, and the growing certainty that something fundamental had shifted in my carefully constructed world. I made a cup of tea and sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the stack of Christmas cards I'd bought but hadn't yet sent. Traditional ones with snow scenes and Bible verses, the kind Stella would probably find dated and overly sentimental. Outside my window, snow was beginning to fall, dusting the parking lot with a pristine white that would be gray and slushy by morning. I thought about Liam as a little boy, pressing his face against the glass, waiting for the first snowflake. When had he stopped seeing magic in simple things? When had he started seeing me as a burden instead of the woman who'd given him everything? My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe Liam was checking to make sure I'd gotten home safely. But the message was from my insurance company, reminding me about open enrollment. I set the phone aside and stared at my reflection in the dark window. 62 years old, silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, the same brown eyes that had watched my son take his first steps, graduate from college, marry the wrong woman. When had I become invisible? When had I stopped being Addison Lewis, the woman who'd built a life from nothing, and become simply an inconvenience to be managed? The questions swirled in my mind as I prepared for bed, but I had no answers. Only the strange sensation that something was about to change, though I couldn't yet imagine what form that change might take. I turned off the lights and lay in the darkness, listening to the wind rattle my windows, and wondering if Liam and Stella were still talking about me, or if I'd already been forgotten until the next obligatory gathering. What I didn't know was that tomorrow would bring revelations that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my place in this family. But that night, I simply closed my eyes and tried to forget the taste of humiliation that lingered on my tongue like bitter medicine. The phone rang at 7:30 in the morning, jarring me from a restless sleep filled with dreams of crystal glasses breaking and diamond rings floating in dark water. I fumbled for the receiver, my heart already racing with the particular dread that comes from early morning calls. "Addison? It's me." Liam's voice sounded strained, unfamiliar. "Liam? What's wrong?" I sat up, instantly alert. "Is Stella okay? We need to talk. Can you come over? Now?" The urgency in his voice sent ice through my veins. "Of course. I'll be right there." I threw on yesterday's clothes and drove through the morning snow, my mind racing through possibilities. Heart attack, car accident, family emergency. Nothing in my imagination came close to what I was about to face. Liam met me at the door, his face pale and drawn. Behind him, Stella stood in the hallway, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She was still in her silk pajamas, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Come in," Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to— There's something." "Liam, just tell her," Stella interrupted, her voice sharp with impatience. "There's no point in drawing this out." I followed them into the living room, the same space where I'd watched Liam open Christmas presents as a child, where I'd taught him to play chess, where I'd held him while he cried over his first heartbreak. Now it felt like a courtroom, and I was about to be sentenced for a crime I didn't understand. "Mom, please sit down," Liam said, gesturing to the couch. He couldn't meet my eyes. "What's going on?" I asked, remaining standing. Something in the air, some electric tension, warned me that sitting would put me at a disadvantage. Stella moved to the mantelpiece, her fingers drumming against the marble surface. "Addison, I don't know how to say this delicately, so I'll just be direct. My engagement ring is missing." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Missing? What do you mean, missing?" "I mean it's gone. Disappeared. I took it off to do the dishes last night after you left, and when I went to put it back on this morning, it wasn't there." I stared at her, my mind struggling to process what she was implying. "I don't understand. What does that have to do with me?" Stella's laugh was like breaking glass. "Oh, Addison, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Make what harder?" But even as I asked, the pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. The way Stella had positioned herself near the kitchen, the way she'd insisted I help clear the table, the way she'd watched me with those calculating eyes all evening. "Mom," Liam said quietly, we think, that maybe you accidentally picked it up when you were helping in the kitchen." Accidentally. The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud, not directly accusatory, but leaving just enough room for interpretation, just enough wiggle room for plausible deniability. "You think I stole Stella's ring?" The words came out flat, emotionless, though inside I was screaming. "No one said anything about stealing," Stella said quickly, her voice dripping with false concern. "It's just, well, you seemed so upset when you left, and you were in the kitchen, and you've been having some difficulties lately." Difficulties. Financial strain from living on a fixed income, the occasional forgetfulness that came with age and stress, the fact that I'd had to pawn my mother's jewelry last year to pay for car repairs. Somehow, in Stella's narrative, these normal life challenges had transformed me into a common thief. "I want you to search my purse," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Stella's eyes flickered with something that might have been disappointment. "Oh, Addison, that's not necessary. I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding." "Search it." I grabbed my purse from the coffee table and dumped its contents onto the glass surface. Wallet, keys, tissues, reading glasses, prescription bottles, a half-eaten roll of mints. No ring. Liam stared at the pile of my life's detritus, his face flushed with what I hoped was shame. "Mom, you don't have to." "Check my coat pockets," I interrupted, already shrugging out of my winter coat. "Check everything." Stella watched with those cold blue eyes as I turned my pockets inside out, revealing nothing but lint and a crumpled grocery list. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "Well," Stella said finally, "it must have fallen somewhere else. Behind the stove, maybe. Or in the garbage disposal." But I could see it in her face. The slight narrowing of her eyes. The almost imperceptible tightening around her mouth. She was disappointed. She'd been hoping I'd refuse to be searched, or that somehow she'd planted evidence I hadn't found yet. This wasn't about a missing ring. This was about something else entirely. I should go, I said, my voice hollow. Mom, wait. Liam reached for my arm, but I stepped away. For what? For you to continue believing I'm a thief? For Stella to come up with more creative ways to humiliate me? No one thinks you're a thief, Liam said, but his voice lacked conviction. Stella stepped forward, her expression a masterpiece of false sympathy. Addison, I know this is difficult, but you have to understand our position. The ring is very valuable, and it has sentimental worth that can't be replaced. Sentimental worth. The ring Liam had gone into debt to buy her. The ring she wore like a crown to signal her ownership of everything in this house, including my son. The ring that had never left her finger except when she was showering or sleeping. I understand perfectly, I said, grabbing my coat. I understand that you've decided I'm the kind of person who would steal from my own family. I understand that my son believes his wife over his mother. I understand that I'm no longer welcome in this house. That's not true, Liam protested, but he made no move to stop me as I headed for the door. Mom, please, let's just what? I spun around, and for the first time all morning I let my fury show. Let's just pretend this didn't happen? Let's just move on like you didn't just accuse me of theft? Like you didn't just choose her over me? The raw pain in my voice seemed to register with Liam, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy I'd raised. But then Stella moved to his side, her hand slipping into his, and the moment was gone. I think everyone needs to calm down, Stella said, her voice maddeningly reasonable. This is exactly the kind of overreaction that makes family gatherings so difficult. Overreaction. I was overreacting to being accused of theft by my daughter-in-law and abandoned by my son. I was overreacting to having my character assassinated in the same room where I'd read Liam bedtime stories and helped him with algebra homework. Goodbye, Liam, I said, not looking at Stella at all. When you find that ring, and you will find it, I hope you remember this conversation. I hope you remember what you chose to believe about the woman who raised you. I drove home in a state of numb shock, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The snow was falling harder now. Fat flakes that obscured the road and made the world look soft and forgiving. But I felt anything but forgiven. Back in my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my phone. Part of me wanted to call someone, to share this burden with another human being. But who? My few remaining friends were either dead or in nursing homes. My sister lived in California, and we barely spoke. Liam had been my primary relationship, my main connection to the world beyond my job and my small daily routines. I made coffee with shaking hands and tried to make sense of what had just happened. The accusation itself was bad enough, but it was the orchestrated nature of it that really cut deep. Stella's performance had been too polished, too prepared. She'd known exactly what she was going to say and how she was going to say it. But why? What did she gain from this elaborate charade? What was the point of destroying what little relationship I had left with my son? The answer came to me slowly, like dawn breaking over a landscape I'd never seen before. It wasn't about the ring at all. It was about eliminating me entirely from Liam's life. Stella had spent 3 years systematically isolating him from his friends, his hobbies, his independence. I was the last obstacle to her complete control. By painting me as mentally unstable, financially desperate, and morally compromised, she'd created a narrative that would justify cutting me out completely. Liam would tell people that his mother had developed problems in her old age, that it was too difficult to have me around, that Stella had tried to help, but some situations were just beyond repair. I was still processing this revelation when my phone chimed with a text message, then another, then another. The notifications kept coming, a steady stream that made my stomach clench with dread. I picked up the phone with trembling fingers and saw that I'd been added to a group chat called Brooks Family. The messages were multiplying rapidly, and as I scrolled through them, I felt the world tilt on its axis. At the top of the chain was an audio message from Stella, to the family group, sent at 6:47 a.m. My finger hovered over the play button. Something told me that once I heard what was on that recording, there would be no going back. No pretending this was all a misunderstanding. No hoping that tomorrow would bring reconciliation. I pressed play. Stella's voice filled my kitchen, bright and animated, carrying the particular giddiness of someone who believed they'd just pulled off the perfect crime. "Oh my God, girls, you should have seen her face. I'm telling you, this plan was absolutely brilliant. Liam completely bought it. He actually looked sick when I told him the ring was missing. And Addison? She went through her purse like a woman possessed. I almost felt bad for her. Almost." Laughter echoed from the phone speaker. Stella's friends, I realized. Her little coven of equally vapid wives who spent their days at yoga classes and wine tastings while scheming about people who actually worked for a living. "But where did you hide it?" another voice asked. "In my jewelry box, obviously. Right where it's always been. I just took it off this morning and pretended it had been gone all night. The whole thing was so easy, I almost can't believe it worked. My hands were shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. The coffee mug beside me had gone cold, forgotten, as Stella's voice continued to pour poison into my ears. The best part is that Liam will never question it now. I've been planting seeds for months about how his mother's been acting strange lately, how she seems desperate for money, how she's been forgetting things. This was just the final nail in the coffin. "You're evil," one of her friends giggled. "Absolutely diabolical." "I prefer strategically minded," Stella replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Look, she was never going to back off on her own. Still calling Liam 3 times a week, showing up uninvited, making those passive-aggressive comments about how we never visit her anymore. She needed to understand that there's a new woman in charge of this family. What if she had refused to be searched? Another friend asked. Even better. Then I could have played the victim. I can't believe she won't even try to clear her name. But honestly, either way worked for me. If she'd submitted to being searched, which she did, then she looks desperate and guilty. If she'd refused, she looks defensive and guilty. Win-win. I set the phone down on the table, my entire body trembling with a rage so pure it felt like swallowing fire. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only sit there and absorb the magnitude of what I'd just heard. She had planned this. Every humiliating second of this morning had been choreographed in advance. While I'd been lying awake last night worrying about family dynamics and wondering where I'd gone wrong as a mother, Stella had been plotting my systematic destruction. I picked up the phone again, scrolling through the group chat messages that had followed the audio. Liam's name appeared multiple times, his texts getting increasingly frantic. Liam. Stella. What the hell is this? Liam. Is this some kind of joke? Liam. Stella. Answer your phone. Liam. Mom. I'm so sorry. I'm coming over. But those messages were from 20 minutes ago, and there had been nothing since. I could picture what was happening. Stella performing damage control, spinning this new narrative, probably claiming the audio was taken out of context or that she'd been joking with her friends to cope with the stress of the situation. And Liam, my sweet boy who'd grown into a weak man, would probably believe her. My phone rang. Liam's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I just stared at it. Let it ring and ring until it went to voicemail. Then it rang again. This time I answered. Mom? Thank God. I've been trying to... I heard the recording, Liam. Silence stretched between us like a chasm. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. She says it was just... She was venting to her friends. She says she was upset and said things she didn't mean. She said she hid the ring in her jewelry box. She said she planned the whole thing to get rid of me. I know, but she called me desperate. She said I was forgetting things, that I needed to understand there was a new woman in charge. Mom, please, can we just talk about this? Can I come over? I closed my eyes and saw Liam at 8 years old, tears streaming down his face after he'd broken my favorite vase playing baseball in the house. The same Liam who'd promised he'd never lie to me again. The same Liam who'd sworn that nothing would ever come between us. What would be the point? I asked. The point would be that you're my mother and I love you. And I made a terrible mistake. You didn't make a mistake, Liam. You made a choice. When your wife accused me of theft, You chose to believe her. When she humiliated me in front of you, you chose to let her. When I walked out of that house this morning, you chose not to stop me. I was confused. I didn't know what to think. You knew me for 37 years before you knew her for 3. That should have told you what to think. I could hear him crying now. Soft sounds that might once have broken my heart. But something had crystallized inside me during these past few hours. Something hard and clear and unforgiving. Mom, please, let me make this right. How? How do you make this right? Do you apologize for believing I'm a thief? Do you ask Stella to say she's sorry for orchestrating my humiliation? Do we all just pretend this never happened and go back to family dinners where she insults me and you pretend not to notice? I'll talk to her. I'll make sure she understands. She understands perfectly. That's the problem. This wasn't some momentary lapse in judgment, Liam. This was a calculated campaign to remove me from your life. And it worked. Don't say that. She won. She got exactly what she wanted. Congratulations. I hung up before he could respond and immediately turned off my phone. The silence that followed was different from any quiet I'd ever experienced. Not peaceful, but expectant, like the moment before thunder. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet, pulling out the small suitcase I used for weekend trips. I wasn't sure yet where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here, in this apartment where I'd wait for Liam to call, where I'd torture myself, wondering if I was being too harsh, where I'd eventually convince myself to accept whatever half-hearted apology Stella deigned to offer. As I packed, I found myself thinking about my late husband, Robert. He'd been gone 15 years now, but I could still hear his voice sometimes, especially when I was facing difficult decisions. "Addison," he'd say, "you've got more strength in your pinky finger than most people have in their whole body. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Robert had never liked Stella from the moment Liam brought her home. "There's something calculating about that one," he'd said after their first dinner together. "She's always working an angle." I'd dismissed his concerns at the time, chalking them up to the natural suspicion any parent feels toward their child's romantic partner. Now I wondered how different things might have been if Robert had lived to see this day. Would Liam have been brave enough to choose Stella over both his parents? Or was my isolation what had made this betrayal possible? I folded my clothes mechanically, my mind already moving beyond grief and into something colder and more purposeful. Stella thought she'd won, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that humiliating me would break me, that I'd slink away quietly and accept my exile with appropriate shame. She didn't know that the same woman who'd worked 2 jobs to raise her son alone was still inside this 62-year-old body. She didn't know that the same Addison who'd fought insurance companies and bank loan officers and dismissive doctors was perfectly capable of fighting her. I picked up my laptop and opened a new document. If Stella wanted to play games with evidence and recordings, then we'd play games. But I had 40 years of experience managing information and documentation that she couldn't match. I started typing, recording everything I could remember from the past 3 years. Every slight, every manipulation, every time Stella had undermined my relationship with Liam, every financial detail I knew about their lifestyle, their debts, their spending habits, every friend and family member who might be willing to listen to the truth. Stella had spent months preparing for this moment, but she'd also given me everything I needed to prepare for what came next. My phone, still turned off, sat silent on the kitchen table. Let Liam call. Let him agonize about whether I'd forgive him. Let Stella wonder if her plan had worked, or if it had just awakened something in me that she wasn't prepared to handle. I had work to do. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but I was no longer thinking about the cold. I was thinking about how Stella's friends would react when they realized their private conversation had been broadcast to the family. I was thinking about how Liam's co-workers would view him when they learned his wife had framed his elderly mother for theft. I was thinking about all the ways a person's carefully constructed life could crumble when the truth finally came to light. Stella wanted me gone? Fine. But she was about to learn that there was a difference between removing someone and destroying them, and that difference was about to become her problem, not mine. 3 days later, I sat across from Serenity Reed in the coffee shop where we'd met every Tuesday morning for the past 8 years. Serenity was my neighbor from the apartment complex, a widow like me. But unlike me, she'd maintained relationships with all 4 of her children and had the kind of bustling social life I'd always envied. "Addison, you look terrible," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd perfected the art of direct conversation. "What's going on?" I debated whether to tell anyone about what had happened. Part of me wanted to retreat into my apartment and nurse my wounds in private. But Stella's recording had given me something I hadn't had before: irrefutable proof. And Serenity, with her network of friends and her reputation for absolute honesty, was exactly the kind of ally I needed. "Serenity, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole story before you react." She set down her spoon and gave me her full attention. "I'm listening." I told her everything. The Christmas dinner, the accusation, the humiliating search, Liam's betrayal. And then I played the recording. Serenity's face went through a series of transformations as Stella's voice filled the space between us: shock, disgust, and finally, a cold fury that reminded me why I'd chosen her as a confidant. "That manipulative little bitch," Serenity said, her voice low enough not to carry to other tables but intense enough to make her feelings clear. "How dare she? How dare Liam let her?" "Serenity, no, Addison. This is beyond acceptable. This is—" She struggled for words. "This is psychological warfare. This is what abusive people do. They isolate their victims from their support systems." I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but hearing Serenity say it out loud made something click into place. Stella wasn't just trying to control Liam. She was systematically dismantling every relationship that might challenge her authority. "What are you going to do?" Serenity asked. "I'm not sure yet, but I know I'm not going to disappear quietly like she wants." Serenity leaned forward, her eyes bright with the same intensity I'd seen when she'd organized the Tenants Association to fight our landlord's illegal rent increases. "What do you need?" The simple question, asked without judgment or qualification, nearly broke my composure. When was the last time someone had asked what I needed instead of telling me what I should want? "I need people to know the truth," I said. "Stella's been building a narrative about me for months, that I'm unstable, desperate, forgetting things. I need people to hear her own words describing how she planned this. Consider it done. I'll start with the ladies at church. Martha McCarthy has a grandson who works at Liam's company. Carol Kelly's daughter went to high school with Stella. Word will spread." I felt a flicker of something I hadn't experienced in months, the sense that I wasn't alone in this fight. "There's something else," I said, pulling out a folder I'd prepared. "I've been documenting Stella's behavior for the past few years. I thought I was going crazy, thinking maybe I was imagining the subtle cruelties, but I kept notes." Serenity flipped through the pages, her expression growing darker with each entry. 3 years of carefully recorded incidents. Stella forgetting to invite me to Liam's birthday dinner. Stella returning my Christmas gifts unopened with notes about decluttering. Stella's comments about my appearance, my job, my apartment, always delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. "This is a pattern," Serenity said finally. "This isn't just family drama. This is systematic psychological abuse. I want copies of this recording sent to everyone in Liam's life who matters to him. His co-workers, his old friends, his college buddies. I want them to know exactly what kind of woman he married and what she's capable of." Serenity studied my face carefully. "Addison, are you sure about this? Once you go nuclear, there's no going back. Liam might never forgive you." "Liam already chose his side," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "He had a chance to stand up for me, and he didn't. He had a chance to question Stella's story, and he didn't. He had 40 years of evidence about my character, and he threw it away based on her word." "What about your relationship with him?" I thought about Liam at 8 years old, proudly showing me the Mother's Day card he'd made at school. Liam at 18, hugging me after his high school graduation. Liam at 25, calling me for advice about his first job interview. All those moments felt like they belonged to someone else now. Someone who'd been naive enough to believe that love and history meant something in the face of sustained manipulation. What relationship? The one where I walk on eggshells and accept his wife's abuse to maintain access to a son who no longer trusts me? The one where I pretend not to notice that every family gathering is designed to remind me of my place at the bottom of the hierarchy? Serenity nodded slowly. You're right. And honestly, someone needs to show Liam what he's married to. Maybe this will be the wake-up call he needs. I spent the next hour with Serenity, planning what she called our information campaign. Serenity had connections throughout the city: church groups, book clubs, volunteer organizations. More importantly, she had credibility. When Serenity Reed said something, people listened. I'll start with Constance Ogden, Serenity said, making notes on a napkin. She's been Liam's insurance agent for years, knows him personally. Then Marge Freeling. Her daughter works at the bank where Stella shops. The story will spread organically from there. We also planned the timing. Serenity would begin sharing the recording that afternoon, starting with people who knew our family personally. By evening, the story would begin reaching Liam's professional circle. By the end of the week, everyone who mattered in his life would know exactly what had happened. What about you? Serenity asked as we prepared to leave. Where will you be while all this is happening? I'm driving to my sister's house in California. I need distance while this plays out. It was a lie, but a necessary one. I'd checked into a small bed and breakfast about 30 miles away, close enough to monitor the situation, but far enough to avoid any immediate confrontations. I wanted to watch this unfold from a position of safety. That evening, I sat in my temporary refuge and began receiving text messages. The first came from Liam at 6:47 p.m. Mom, people are calling me. What did you do? Then another, 20 minutes later. Stella is crying. She says you're trying to destroy our marriage. And another, please call me. We need to talk about this. I didn't respond to any of them. Let him experience the same feeling of helplessness I'd felt 3 days ago. Let him wonder what I was thinking, what I was planning, whether I'd ever speak to him again. My phone rang repeatedly. Liam, then numbers I didn't recognize, then Liam again. I turned it off and ran a hot bath, settling into the warm water with a glass of wine from the minibar. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something approaching peace, not happiness. That would take time, if it ever came again. But the particular satisfaction that comes from refusing to be a victim. Stella had declared war on me, probably thinking I'd surrender at the first shot. She'd underestimated the fact that some women don't break, they plan. And when they finally act, they act with the accumulated wisdom of decades spent being underestimated by people who mistook patience for weakness. My laptop chimed with an email from Serenity. The subject line read, Mission accomplished. Day 1. Addison. The response has been stronger than I expected. Constance was horrified. Apparently Liam's been talking about your financial problems and memory issues for months, laying groundwork for Stella's story. She feels sick that she believed it. Martha says her grandson confirms that Liam's been acting strange at work lately, jumpy and defensive when people ask about his family. Makes sense now. Carol's daughter remembers Stella from high school. Apparently she's always been manipulative, but back then she targeted other girls instead of their mothers. The recording is spreading. I'd estimate at least 30 people have heard it by now, and they're all sharing it with their own networks. Stella's going to have a very difficult week. Call me tomorrow, we're just getting started. Serenity. I closed the laptop and looked out at the snow-covered parking lot. Somewhere in the city, Stella was probably realizing that her perfect crime had become her greatest mistake. Somewhere, Liam was beginning to understand the true cost of his choices. And somewhere, a network of people who'd known me for years were learning the truth about what had been done to me and deciding that it was unacceptable. Tomorrow would bring new developments, new revelations, new consequences for Stella's actions. But tonight, for the first time in months, I fell asleep without feeling afraid of what morning might bring. The war was far from over, but the first battle had been mine. 1 week later, I returned to my apartment to find 17 voicemails waiting. The messages painted a portrait of Stella's world systematically collapsing, each call more desperate than the last. Liam's voice on message 3. Mom, Stella's book club dropped her. They said what she did was morally reprehensible. Please, can we talk? Message 7. Her yoga instructor asked her not to come back, said the other members were uncomfortable. Mom, this has gone too far. Message 12. She can't even go to the grocery store without people staring. Someone actually walked away from her in the cereal aisle. You've made your point. But the message that interested me most was number 16. Stella's voice, no longer bright and confident but raw with defeat. Addison, this is Stella. I need to talk to you, please. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to explain, to apologize. Things have gotten so out of hand, and please call me back. I saved that message and deleted the others. Serenity knocked on my door an hour later, carrying grocery bags and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who'd watched justice served. Welcome back, she said, bustling into my kitchen. I brought provisions. You're going to want to hear about this week. She unpacked ingredients while telling me about Stella's week of social exile. The story had reached every corner of their social circle with devastating efficiency. Stella's close friend Alexis Lowy had been the first to publicly distance herself, posting on social media about toxic people who manipulate situations to hurt innocent family members. Others had followed suit rapidly. The momentum built on itself, Serenity explained, pulling vegetables from bags. Once people heard the recording, they started remembering their own experiences with her. Turns out your daughter-in-law has been leaving a trail of subtle cruelties for years. Such as? Christine Slaughter's daughter had Stella for a bridesmaid. Apparently, Stella spent the entire engagement making comments about the wedding being too modest and the dress being unfortunate for her figure. Nancy Maloney remembers Stella making jokes about her husband's weight at a dinner party. Joan Eshu says Stella once commented that her grandchildren were oddly quiet, in a way that suggested developmental problems. I absorbed this information while Serenity continued unpacking. Stella's pattern was becoming clear. She targeted people's vulnerabilities with surgical precision, always maintaining plausible deniability by disguising cruelty as concern or humor. What about Liam's work? Serenity's expression grew more serious. That's where things get complicated. His supervisor, Warren Schmoke, heard the recording. Apparently, Liam's been requesting advances on his salary for months to cover their expenses. Warren's starting to question Liam's judgment, both personal and professional. The irony wasn't lost on me. Stella's expensive lifestyle, funded by Liam's financial strain, was now threatening the very career that supported it. There's more, Serenity continued. Stella tried damage control. She's been calling people, claiming the recording was taken out of context, that she was just venting about family stress. But once people hear her laughing about the plan and calling you desperate, no one's buying it. Worse than that, the more she tries to explain, the more calculated she sounds. Yesterday she called Maxine Mikulski crying, saying you were a vindictive old woman destroying an innocent marriage. Maxine hung up on her. I felt a dark satisfaction at that image. Stella, reduced to making desperate phone calls to women who'd already made up their minds about her character. My phone rang. Liam's name appeared on the screen. Answer it, Serenity said quietly. It's time. Hello, Liam. Mom. His voice was exhausted, defeated. Can I come over? Please? We need to end this. I need to end this. Stella. She's not handling it well. She's barely eating, barely sleeping. She keeps talking about how her life is ruined. Is Stella with you now? She's in the car. She wanted to come up, to apologize in person. I looked at Serenity, who nodded grimly. We'd been preparing for this moment. Bring her up. 20 minutes later, they stood in my living room looking like refugees from their own life. Liam had lost weight, his clothes hanging loose on his frame. But it was Stella who showed the real damage. Her perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her designer clothes wrinkled, her face bare of the makeup that usually created her polished facade. She looked, for the first time since I'd known her, like a woman who understood consequences. Addison, she began, her voice small and uncertain. I owe you an enormous apology. For what, specifically? Stella glanced at Liam, who nodded encouragingly. For For the ring. For accusing you. For planning the whole thing. Go on. I was wrong. I was cruel. I was trying to... I wanted... She struggled with the words. Perhaps because she'd never had to take genuine responsibility for her actions before. You wanted me gone, I said, helping her along. You wanted to eliminate my relationship with my son so you could have complete control over his life. Yes. The admission came out as barely a whisper. You spent months laying groundwork, telling people I was having memory problems and financial difficulties, so that when you finally framed me for theft, everyone would believe it was plausible. Yes. Liam stared at his wife as if seeing her clearly for the first time. You've been planning this for months? Stella's composure cracked completely. Liam, you don't understand. She was always there, always calling, always having opinions about our decisions. I needed space to build our marriage without her interference. So you decided to destroy her reputation and humiliate her in front of me? I thought if you saw her as unreliable, you'd naturally start depending on me more. I didn't think about how it would hurt her. I only thought about us. The casual admission of her complete disregard for my well-being was breathtaking in its honesty. She hadn't even considered me human enough to factor my pain into her calculations. And now? I asked. What do you want now? I want to make it right, Stella said quickly. I'll call everyone, tell them I lied. I'll explain that I was going through a difficult time and made terrible choices. I'll take full responsibility. In exchange for what? She looked confused by the question. In exchange for ending this. For you calling off your friends. For giving Liam and me a chance to rebuild. I studied her face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse beyond fear of consequences. You think this is negotiation? I hoped we could find a solution that works for everyone. Stella, let me explain something to you. When you framed me for theft, you didn't just humiliate me. You destroyed my relationship with my son. You made me question my own sanity. You turned me into a suspect in my own family. I know, and I'm not finished. My voice was calm, controlled, but it carried enough authority to silence her immediately. You did all of this because you viewed me as an obstacle to be removed. Not as Liam's mother, not as a human being with feelings and dignity, but as a problem to be solved. Liam was watching our exchange with growing horror, finally understanding the full scope of what his wife had done. The consequences you're experiencing now aren't my revenge, I continued. They're the natural result of your own actions. People are avoiding you because they've heard, in your own words, exactly who you are. But if you would just tell them what? That you're sorry you got caught? That you regret the plan didn't work? Because that's all I'm hearing from you right now. Stella's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the calculating woman underneath. What do you want from me? You want me to grovel? You want me to humiliate myself publicly? Fine. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I don't want anything from you, Stella. That's what you've never understood. I never wanted to control Liam's life or compete with you for his attention. I just wanted to be his mother. I turned to Liam, who stood frozen between us. As for you, I want you to understand something very clearly. When your wife accused me of theft, you had a choice. 40 years of knowing my character versus 3 years of her influence. You chose her. Mom, I was confused. You chose her, I repeated. And that choice has consequences too. I walked to my front door and opened it. I think it's time for you both to leave. Addison, please, Stella said, desperation creeping into her voice. I'll do anything. I'll move away if that's what you want. I'll stay out of your relationship with Liam completely. You already destroyed my relationship with Liam. Moving away won't fix that. Liam finally found his voice. Mom, I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. I know you do, I said, and meant it. But love without trust is just sentiment. And trust, once broken the way you broke it, doesn't heal just because we want it to. They left without another word, Stella sobbing openly in the hallway, Liam's arm around her shoulders in automatic comfort. Even now, even after everything, his instinct was to protect her rather than truly grapple with what she'd done. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling not triumph but a profound exhaustion. Serenity emerged from the kitchen where she'd been discreetly listening. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Empty," I said honestly, "but not broken. For the first time in 3 years, not broken." Outside, snow was beginning to fall again, but I was no longer thinking about cold. I was thinking about the woman I'd been before Stella, before the systematic erosion of my confidence and place in my son's life. I was thinking about reclaiming her. The war was over. I had won, but victory felt different than I'd expected. Less sweet, more necessary, like surgery, painful but required for healing. My phone was already ringing with calls from people who'd heard about the confrontation. Word would spread, as it always did in small communities where everyone knew everyone else's business. Stella's public breakdown would become another chapter in the story people told about consequences and justice. But for now, I was content to sit in my own space, in my own peace, and plan what came next. Because this ending was also a beginning, and I had a life to rebuild on my own terms, without apology, without compromise, without forgiveness for those who'd proven they didn't deserve it. The snow fell heavier outside my window, covering the world in clean white silence, and I began to plan my future.